Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute most fascinating corporate turnarounds in modern tech history. We're talking about the Japanese tech company Renesas. Usually when a massive corporation is just on the brink of collapse and the government steps in, the success rate is, well, it's shockingly low. Studies actually show that big public bailouts often just drag out the inevitable, trapping these companies in a cycle of dependency. The usual story ends in either a spectacular crash or this messy, indefinite government rescue. But Renesas, they took a totally different path. It's literally a masterclass in how a company can go from needing a massive bailout to becoming a fierce, independent global competitor.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we hear the word bailout, a very specific and, let's be real, often pretty negative image pops into our heads. There's this common fear, and it's a totally valid one, that injecting public money into a failing company just subsidizes corporate inefficiency. We constantly worry that government intervention is just going to prop up a lifeless shell of a business, creating what economists call a zombie firm. You know the type, a company that just kind of shuffles along, technically kept alive by taxpayer cash, but fundamentally unable to actually survive on its own in the open market. But hey, this is exactly where Japan flipped the script. They completely avoided that dreaded zombie firm trap, and they did it by using a strategy known as conditional industrial policy. Now, this is not just a free handout. We're talking about government financial support that is strictly linked to company performance, rigorous restructuring, and very, very clear expectations. The public investment is the lifeline, sure, but the company actually has to earn it by making the hard choices to fix their underlying business model.
So let's move on to Section 1, the zombie firm myth, and the difference between rescuing and transforming. The absolute crucial point here is that rescuing a company and transforming a company are two entirely different things. A lot of governments around the world, well, they're pretty quick to just write checks during a crisis. Their main goal is often just a rescue mission, right? Saving jobs for the next election cycle or maybe preventing an immediate economic shock. But very few governments actually manage to use that massive financial leverage to enforce the really difficult private market reforms that lead to transforming the business. See, in times of crisis, private markets often struggle to make those painful changes needed for long-term survival. But the Japanese government, they recognize this distinction perfectly, and they use their public investment as the ultimate catalyst for real structural transformation.
Which brings us to Section 2, conditional industrial policy and actionable demands. So this government support, it came with 4 pretty brutal ultimatums for Renesas. First, they absolutely had to shut down unprofitable factories. Now, just imagine the localized economic pain and the intense political pushback of closing massive manufacturing plants. I mean, it's agonizing for any legacy company. Second, they had to slash their excess capacity. Third, they were forced to really streamline their product portfolio. Basically, they had to stop trying to make everything for everyone and kill off those old legacy product lines. And fourth, there was this unbending mandate to vastly improve operational efficiency. Look, these are incredibly painful restructuring steps, but the Japanese government fundamentally refused to subsidize inefficiency. They tied their money directly to these performance metrics, proving that when public funds are linked to genuine, agonizing restructuring, it can actually strengthen a company's competitiveness instead of weakening it.
Moving right along to Section 3, playing to their strengths and finding that strategic advantage. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the strategic decision Renesas made regarding who to fight and, honestly, more importantly, who not to fight. They made a very calculated decision not to compete with Taiwan's TSMC in advanced chip manufacturing. Let's be real, that would have been a massive, insanely expensive uphill battle against an entrenched giant. Instead, they pivoted. They focused heavily on automotive microcontrollers and power semiconductors. This was just a brilliant David and Goliath decision. They looked at their own strong technological fundamentals and chose to fight entirely on their own terms. They leaned right into the areas where they already held world-leading expertise and a really distinct comparative advantage. And man, did that strategic choice pay off spectacularly, all thanks to the EV and autonomous driving boom. I mean, just think about how much the automotive industry is changing in our own daily lives right now. A modern electric vehicle isn't just a car anymore. It's effectively a supercomputer on wheels. It requires thousands of individual semiconductor chips just to manage battery usage, process sensor data for autonomous driving, and regulate power distribution. So as these highly connected cars became more and more common, the demand for the exact technologies Renesas specialized in, those super reliable automotive microcontrollers and power semiconductors, well, it's skyrocketed dramatically. Their specific, narrowed focus perfectly aligned with this massive global market shift. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were suddenly providing the essential nervous system for the whole future of transportation.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, expanding globally through strategic growth.
Now armed with restored profitability, Renesas didn't just sit back. They aggressively expanded their footprint through some really targeted global acquisitions. They basically went on the offensive, looking to build and completely dominate their presence in three key areas: industrial automation, global connectivity, and embedded systems. They were taking that incredibly strong foundation they built up during their restructuring phase, and they were multiplying it on an international scale to solidify their market position against global competitors.
Let's move to and see how this builds along a timeline, because this global offensive happened fast. In 2017, Renesas acquired Intersil, and that was followed closely by grabbing integrated device technology in 2019. But I want you to notice the incredible balancing act happening in the background during this exact same period. Between 2017 and 2021, the INCJ, that's the Japanese government-backed fund, was gradually selling off its stake in the company. So right as Renesas was aggressively expanding and projecting all this strength globally, the government was executing a very carefully calculated withdrawal.
Which takes us to our final part, Section 5, the successful government exit, why they were never a permanent owner. This is perhaps the absolute most remarkable aspect of the entire Renesas story, and honestly, it's something you just incredibly rarely see. Unlike so many state-owned enterprises globally, where the government gets comfortable, enjoys having control, and just sticks around forever, the Japanese government never intended to be a permanent shareholder. Never. Once Renesas had effectively completed its restructuring, returned to profitability, and fully restored investor confidence, the government backed out. They eventually exited almost completely. It's really astonishing. They didn't stick around to micromanage, they just let the private market take the reins back, exactly as they originally planned.
And this brilliantly illustrates a profound principle of public policy right from our source material. The role of the state is not necessarily to own businesses, but to create conditions in which strategically important businesses can survive, recover, and compete independently. The Renesas story, well, it isn't just a win for the company's executives. It is a total triumph of strategic government intervention. It's really the gold standard for a successful exit strategy, proving that the state can act as a temporary bridge to independence rather than just becoming a permanent crutch.
So, what does this all mean for the future? I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. As we look at other vital industries around the world that might face sudden crises or require bailouts down the line, is this model of strict, conditional support the ultimate blueprint? Think about it. If governments only offer financial lifelines that are tied directly to hard reforms and clear exit strategies, how many other failing legacy companies out there could be completely transformed into global competitors? It absolutely reframes how we should think about public investment in the private sector. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a powerful, totally new lens through which to view corporate turnarounds.